Every pet owner knows that feeling when something's wrong with their beloved companion. For Lena Morrison, her golden retriever Moose wasn't just a pet. He was family, her constant companion through veterinary school, and her brightest light. After long days at the clinic, when Moose started scratching after their weekend hike, Lena figured it was just fleas. She'd seen it hundreds of times at Pine Ridge Animal Clinic where she worked. Simple problem, easy fix. But when Dr. Harrison lifted the fur on Moose's shoulder that Tuesday morning, they both froze. Beneath the golden coat were deep, perfectly round holes burrowing into his skin. Too clean, too precise, too deliberate to be natural. What could create such wounds in a healthy dog? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The silence in examination room 3 stretched longer than either of them expected. Dr. Marcus Harrison had been practicing veterinary medicine for 32 years, and in all that time, he'd never seen anything quite like this. His weathered hands, steady from decades of delicate procedures, trembled slightly as he adjusted the examination light for a better view. Lena Morrison stood beside the stainless steel table, one hand gently stroking Moose's head while the other clutched her worn veterinary training journal, a leather-bound notebook she'd carried since her first day of school 2 years ago. Every case, every observation, every sketch of unusual symptoms filled those pages. It had become her most trusted companion, second only to the golden retriever, now lying patiently under the harsh clinic lights. "Have you ever seen anything like this before?" Lena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She'd been working at Pine Ridge Animal Clinic for 18 months, first as a part-time assistant while finishing her coursework, and now as a veterinary technician in training. Dr. Harrison had become more than just a supervisor. He was her mentor, the father figure she'd never had, and the steady presence that made her believe she could actually make it in this demanding field. Dr. Harrison removed his reading glasses and cleaned them methodically. A habit Lena had learned meant he was thinking deeply about something troubling. In 32 years of practice, I can honestly say I haven't. He replaced his glasses and leaned closer to examine the wounds again. "These aren't bites, scratches, or any kind of trauma I recognize. The edges are too uniform, too precise." Moose lifted his golden head and looked at Lena with those trusting brown eyes that had gotten her through some of the darkest moments of her life. She'd found him as a 6-week-old puppy at the county shelter 3 years ago, just after her mother's funeral, when the weight of student loans and grief had nearly broken her resolve to become a veterinarian. The shelter volunteers said he'd been abandoned in a cardboard box by the highway, but from the moment Lena held him, she knew they were meant to be together. "Let's start from the beginning," Dr. Harrison said, pulling up a rolling stool and settling his tall frame onto it. "Tell me exactly when you first noticed the scratching." Lena opened her journal to the page she'd started that morning, filled with detailed notes and a rough sketch of Moose's wounds. "Sunday evening, after we got back from hiking the old logging trails up near Timber Ridge. He seemed fine during the hike, energetic, happy, chasing squirrels like always. But around dinner time, I noticed him scratching at his shoulder more than usual." "Did you see him roll in anything unusual during the hike? Dead animals, strange plants, anything that might have irritated his skin?" "Nothing out of the ordinary. We stuck to the main trail most of the time. There's that section where it cuts through the old growth forest, you know, where they're planning to put in those new hiking paths for the resort development. Moose likes to explore the undergrowth there, but I keep him on a long lead." Dr. Harrison nodded, making notes on Moose's chart. Pine Ridge was a small town nestled in the Cascade Mountains, population barely 8,000, where everybody knew everybody and news traveled fast. The proposed Meridian Resort development had been the talk of the town for months, a luxury destination that promised to bring jobs and tourism. revenue to an area that had struggled economically since the lumber mill closed 15 years ago. The scratching got worse Monday night, Lena continued, flipping through her journal pages. I gave him a thorough bath with the medicated shampoo we recommend for flea irritation. That's when I first felt the bumps under his fur, but I couldn't see them clearly. I figured we'd caught a flea infestation early. The clinic around them hummed with the familiar sounds of a busy Tuesday morning. Sarah Chun, their receptionist, was checking in Mrs. Patterson's elderly beagle for his monthly arthritis treatment. In the next room, Dr. Harrison's partner, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, was performing a routine space surgery on a young tabby cat. These were the rhythms that had come to define Lena's days: predictable, comforting, purposeful. Pine Ridge Animal Clinic occupied a converted Victorian house on Elm Street, just 2 blocks from the town's small commercial district. Dr. Harrison had bought the property in 1995, fresh out of veterinary school with dreams of serving a rural community that desperately needed quality animal care. The building's original charm remained in its hardwood floors and bay windows, but every room had been carefully adapted for modern veterinary practice. Lena's living situation reflected the financial realities of veterinary school debt and small-town wages. She rented a small studio apartment above the town's used bookstore, grateful for the affordable rent that Mrs. Holloway, the elderly owner, charged in exchange for help organizing inventory and running the occasional book club meeting. It wasn't glamorous, but it was hers, and more importantly, it allowed pets a non-negotiable requirement when she'd been apartment hunting. "Let me get some better light on this," Dr. Harrison said, rolling over the clinic's high-intensity examination lamp. The moment the bright light hit Moose's shoulder, both of them drew in sharp breaths. Under the enhanced illumination, the wounds were even more disturbing. 5 perfectly circular holes, each about the diameter of a pencil eraser, formed a rough pentagon pattern on Moose's shoulder blade. The edges were clean and smooth, as if something had been systematically boring through the skin and underlying tissue. No inflammation, no signs of infection, no blood, just deep, precise cavities that seemed to go straight down into the muscle. "This is unlike anything in my textbooks," Lena whispered, automatically reaching for her journal to make more detailed notes. Her training had taught her to observe, document, and analyze, but this defied every category of wound or lesion sheet. "Studied." Dr. Harrison gently probed the edges of one hole with a sterile cotton swab. Moose remained calm and patient, trusting the hands that had given him countless vaccinations and checkups over the years. No sensitivity to touch, no discharge, no heat or swelling. It's as if something created these openings and then simply stopped. "What kind of something?" Lena asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. "I honestly don't know. We need to take some tissue samples for analysis. Maybe get some photographs for consultation with the state veterinary pathologist. This is beyond my experience, Lena. I don't want to guess and potentially delay proper treatment." The admission sent a chill through her. Dr. Harrison was the most knowledgeable veterinarian she'd ever worked with, a man whose diagnostic skills had earned respect throughout the region. If he was stumped, the situation was more serious than she'd imagined. Should we start him on antibiotics as a precaution? She asked, already mentally reviewing the clinic's standard protocols for unusual wounds. "Let's hold off until we know more. These don't look infected, and I'd rather not introduce variables that might complicate the pathology results." He straightened up and looked at her with the serious expression she'd learned meant he was about to give her important guidance. "I want you to keep detailed notes about any changes in his behavior, appetite, energy level, anything at all. And I want to see him again in 48 hours, sooner if anything worsens." Lena nodded, closing her journal and securing it in the deep pocket of her scrubs. The leather was worn smooth from constant handling, and the pages were filled with 2 years of learning case studies. treatment protocols, anatomy sketches, and personal observations that had helped her develop from a nervous student into a confident technician. As Dr. Harrison prepared the tissue sampling kit, Lena found herself thinking about the hiking trail where this all began. Timber Ridge had been her and Moose's favorite weekend destination since she'd moved to Pine Ridge. The old logging roads offered miles of peaceful walking, with stunning views of the valley below and plenty of wildlife to keep Moose entertained. She'd never considered it dangerous, just a quiet place where a young woman and her dog could escape the pressures of school and work. "The logging trail's up at Timber Ridge," she said suddenly. "Have you had any other cases from animals that spend time up there?" Dr. Harrison paused in his preparation. "Not that I can recall offhand." "Why?" "Just thinking about environmental factors. Maybe something in the soil or water, some kind of irritant we haven't encountered before." "That's good thinking. Environmental causes are often overlooked in unusual presentations." He smiled at her, the kind of encouraging smile that had helped her through many difficult learning moments. "You're developing excellent diagnostic instincts, Lena. That's exactly the kind of systematic approach that makes a good veterinarian." The compliment warmed her, but couldn't dispel the growing unease she felt about Moose's condition. As Dr. Harrison carefully collected tissue samples from the edge of one wound, she found herself staring out the examination room window at the mountain ridges in the distance. Somewhere up there, among the old growth forest and abandoned logging roads, was the source of whatever had done this to her beloved companion. She opened her journal again and began a new page, writing "environmental investigation" at the top. If Dr. Harrison's experience and the state pathology lab couldn't provide answers, maybe she'd have to find them herself. After all, she knew those trails better than anyone, and she had the scientific training to conduct a proper investigation. The thought both excited and terrified her, but as she looked down at Moose's trusting face, she knew she'd do whatever it took to protect him and make sure no other animals suffered the same mysterious wounds. "We'll figure this out, boy," she whispered, scratching behind his ears in the spot that always made his tail wag. "I promise we'll figure this out." The call from the state veterinary laboratory came 3 days later, just as Lena was finishing her morning rounds of kennel checks. Dr. Harrison answered on the second ring, and she could tell immediately from his expression that the news wasn't what they'd hoped for. "I see," he said into the phone, his voice carefully neutral. "And you've never encountered this type of tissue damage before either?" A long pause. "Yes, we'd be happy to provide additional samples. How many do you need?" Lena set down the clipboard. She'd been using to track medication schedules and moved closer to Dr. Harrison's desk. Through the window behind him, she could see the morning mist still clinging to the lower slopes of Timber Ridge, where she and Moose had walked just 5 days ago in blissful ignorance of what was coming. "They're stumped too," Dr. Harrison said after hanging up. "Dr. Patricia Reeves at the state lab has been practicing veterinary pathology for 20 years, and she's never seen tissue damage like this. The cellular structure around the wounds shows no signs of trauma, infection, or chemical burns. It's as if something simply dissolved the tissue in perfect circles." Before Lena could respond, the clinic's front door chimed, and Sarah Chun's voice carried back to them. "Dr. Harrison? Mrs. Chun is here with Whiskers. She says it's urgent." Mrs. Chun, no relation to their receptionist Sarah, rushed into the examination room carrying a large orange tabby in a pet carrier. Lena had met her several times during routine visits. A retired schoolteacher who lived alone with her 3 cats and treated them like the children she'd never had. "Doctor, I'm so worried about Whiskers," Mrs. Chun said, her voice trembling as she opened the carrier. "He's been acting strange for 2 days, and this morning I found these awful marks on his back." Lena felt her stomach drop as Mrs. Chun lifted the cat onto the examination table. Even before Dr. Harrison parted the orange fur, she could see the telltale pattern of raised bumps along the cat's spine. When the fur was brushed aside, they revealed the same precise circular wounds that marked Moose's shoulder. When did you first notice behavioral changes? Dr. Harrison asked, his professional composure intact, despite what Lena knew must be racing thoughts. Sunday evening. He wouldn't eat his dinner, just sat by the window staring outside. Then yesterday, he started scratching at his back constantly. I thought maybe fleas, but I used that monthly prevention you recommended. Has Whiskers been outside recently? Any exposure to other animals or unusual environments? Mrs. Chun nodded. He's an indoor cat mostly, but I let him out on the screen porch for fresh air. Sometimes he gets out and explores the backyard. My property backs up to those old logging trails, the ones that connect to Timber Ridge. Lena and Dr. Harrison exchanged meaningful glances. Two animals, same unusual wounds, same geographic connection. This was no longer an isolated incident. Mrs. Chun, Lena said gently, we're going to need to run some tests on Whiskers, similar to what we did with my dog earlier this week. Have you noticed any other animals in your neighborhood showing unusual symptoms? Well, now that you mention it, the Hendersons' dog down the street has been acting peculiar. And I heard Martha talking at the grocery store about her chickens not laying eggs. Dr. Harrison began his examination of Whiskers with the same methodical care he'd shown Moose. But Lena could see the concern deepening in his eyes. The wounds were identical in size and depth, arranged in the same pentagon pattern. Whatever was causing this, it wasn't random. The phone rang again, and Sarah's voice came over the intercom. Dr. Harrison, that's Dave Pritchard on line 2. He says 3 of his sheep have developed some kind of skin condition, and he needs you to come out to the farm right away. Tell him we'll be there within the hour, Dr. Harrison replied, then turned to Lena. I want you to come with me. Bring your camera and that journal of yours. If we're dealing with some kind of environmental contamination, we need to start documenting everything systematically. An hour later, they were driving Dr. Harrison's clinic truck up the winding country road that led to Pritchard's sheep farm. The property sat on a gentle slope about 3 miles north of town, with pastures that extended almost to the tree line where the old logging roads began. Lena had passed the farm countless times during her weekend hikes, always admiring the peaceful scene of sheep grazing against the backdrop of forested mountains. Dave Pritchard met them at the gate, his weathered face grim with worry. He was a third-generation sheep farmer, the kind of man who could read animal behavior like a book and rarely called for veterinary help unless the situation was serious. Started noticing problems 2 days ago, he said as they walked toward the affected animals. 3 ewes, all from the flock that grazes the upper pasture near the tree line. They're off their feed, separating from the group, and showing these weird marks on their necks and backs. The sheep were huddled together in the corner of the pasture farthest from the forest edge, their usual calm demeanor replaced by nervous energy. When Dr. Harrison approached the first airway, Lena could see the familiar pattern of circular wounds even from several feet away. Same size, same depth, same arrangement, she murmured, making quick sketches in her journal while Dr. Harrison conducted his examination. Dr. Harrison, we need to map these locations. There's definitely a geographic pattern here. She pulled out the faded military map she'd found in her apartment's previous tenant's belongings, a detailed topographic survey from the 1970s that showed not just the current hiking trails, but older roads and structures that no longer appeared on modern maps. The previous tenant had been a geology student, according to Mrs. Holloway, and had left behind boxes of maps and survey documents. When he graduated and moved away, what's that you've got there? Dave asked, looking over her shoulder at the map. An old survey map of this area. Look, she traced her finger along the route she and Moose had taken on Sunday. My dog was affected here, along this section of the main trail. Mrs. Chun's property is here, where her cat had access to the backyard. "And your upper pasture is?" She paused, studying the topographic lines. "Right here, where this old road used to connect to what looks like some kind of facility." Dr. Harrison left the sheep and joined them around the map. "What kind of facility?" Lena pointed to a square structure marked on the map, surrounded by smaller buildings and connected to the main road by what appeared to be a substantial access route. "The map just labels it as Fort Meridian Federal Research Station. But look at the date on this survey, 1974. I don't remember any Fort Meridian from local history classes. That's because it's not supposed to exist anymore," Dave said quietly. "My father used to talk about it sometimes, usually after he'd had a few beers. Said there was some kind of government facility up there during the Cold War, but it was shut down and buried back in the late 70s. All the local families were told to forget about it, that it was classified military business." The pieces were starting to form a picture that made Lena's chest tighten with anxiety. 3 different animals, all showing identical wounds, all with exposure to areas connected to an abandoned government research facility. The implications were starting to feel much larger than a simple environmental irritant. "We need soil samples from all these locations," she said, her training overriding her growing fear. "And we need to research what exactly was happening at Fort Meridian before it was closed." Dr. Harrison nodded grimly. "I'll contact the state veterinary office again. Let them know we're dealing with multiple cases across different species. This is beyond anything our clinic can handle alone." As they drove back toward town, Lena found herself staring at the tree line where the old logging roads disappeared into shadow. Whatever had been buried up there 47 years ago was apparently not as dead as the government had hoped. And now it was affecting the animals she devoted her life to protecting. She opened her journal to a fresh page and wrote Fort Meridian Investigation at the top, then began listing everything they knew so far. If the authorities weren't going to provide answers quickly enough, she'd have to find them herself. Moose's life and the lives of other animals in the area might depend on it. That evening, Lena sat at her small kitchen table with the Fort Meridian map spread out before her, surrounded by her veterinary textbooks, laptop, and a professional soil sampling kit she quietly borrowed from the clinic's environmental testing supplies. The kit contained everything she needed for proper sample collection: sterile containers, pH testing strips, a small soil auger, and detailed instruction cards for maintaining chain of custody. She'd spent the afternoon researching Fort Meridian online, but found surprisingly little information. A few references in historical documents about Cold War-era research facilities, some mentions in declassified military reports, but nothing specific about what kind of research had been conducted there or why it had been shut down so abruptly. Her laptop chimed with an incoming email from someone named Jake Reeves, responding to a query she'd posted on a regional environmental science forum earlier that day. "Ms. Morrison," the email began, "I saw your post about unusual soil conditions near Timber Ridge. I'm an environmental scientist with the State Department of Natural Resources, currently working on a project documenting legacy contamination sites in the Cascade region. I'd be interested in discussing your findings. Could we meet for coffee tomorrow?" Lena stared at the email for a long moment. She hadn't expected such a quick response, especially from someone with official credentials. Part of her felt relieved that a professional was taking her concerns seriously, that another part wondered if she might be getting in over her head. She typed back a careful response, agreeing to meet at Molly's Diner on Main Street at noon the following day. If Jake Reeves was legitimate, he might have access to information that could help her understand what they were dealing with. If he wasn't, well, she'd chosen a public place with plenty of witnesses. The next morning arrived gray and drizzly, typical Pacific Northwest weather that kept most hikers away from the mountain trails. Perfect conditions for collecting soil samples without drawing attention. Lena loaded her backpack with the sampling kit, her camera, journal, and GPS unit, then clipped Moose's leash to his collar. "Come on, boy. We're going back to where this all started." The drive to the Timber Ridge trailhead took 20 minutes along winding mountain roads. She parked in the small gravel lot, noting that only 2 other vehicles were there, both belonging to serious hikers, whose cars bore the stickers and gear racks of people who spend most weekends in the mountains. The trail began as a well-maintained path through second-growth forest, popular with families and casual hikers. But about a mile in, it branched toward the older logging roads where she and Moose had been exploring the previous weekend. These paths were narrower, less maintained, and frequented mainly by locals who knew the area well. Following her GPS coordinates and the old military map, Lena made her way to the exact location where she estimated Moose had been exposed. The area looked innocuous. Enough tall Douglas firs and western hemlocks created a canopy that filtered the morning light into gentle patterns on the forest floor. Ferns and moss covered most of the ground, and a small creek burbled somewhere nearby. But when she knelt down to examine the soil more closely, she noticed something odd. In several spots, the normal forest floor vegetation seemed sparse, as if something had discouraged plant growth. The soil itself appeared slightly different in color and texture, more granular, with an unusual grayish tint that didn't match the rich brown earth she expected in a healthy forest ecosystem. Working systematically, she collected samples from 5 different locations within a 50-foot radius of where Moose had been exploring. Each sample went into a sterile container, properly labeled with GPS coordinates, depth measurements, and detailed notes about the surrounding vegetation and soil conditions. "What are you finding up there, boy?" she asked Moose, who had been sniffing around the base of a large cedar tree about 20 feet away. His behavior seemed normal, curious, and energetic, but she noticed he wasn't as eager to dig and explore as he usually was in new environments. The GPS coordinates from her map indicated that the Fort Meridian facility had been located approximately 2 miles further up the mountain, accessible by an old logging road that was now barely visible through the undergrowth. Lena debated whether to push deeper into the forest, but decided that prudence and her lunch meeting with Jake Reeves took priority over immediate exploration. Back at the trailhead, she carefully secured the soil samples in her car and made detailed notes about the collection process in her journal. The morning's work had given her concrete data to analyze, but it had also raised new questions about what exactly had been done to this landscape. Decades ago, Molly's Diner occupied a converted railway car on Main Street, complete with red vinyl booths and a long counter that served as the unofficial community bulletin board for Pine Ridge. Lena arrived a few minutes early and chose a corner booth where she could watch the entrance while reviewing her notes. Jake Reeves turned out to be younger than she'd expected, maybe early 30s, with the kind of practical outdoor clothing that suggested he spent more time in the field than behind a desk. He had sandy hair, intelligent green eyes, and the easy manner of someone comfortable explaining complex scientific concepts to non-specialists. "Thanks for meeting me," he said, sliding into the booth across from her. "I have to admit, your forum post caught my attention for reasons beyond professional curiosity. I've been documenting some unusual environmental conditions in this region that might be related to what you're observing." Lena pulled out her journal and the military map, spreading them on the table between their coffee cups. "Before we go any further, can I ask what kind of work you do for the state? I want to make sure I'm not getting involved in something that could compromise my position at the veterinary clinic." Jake nodded approvingly. "Smart question. I'm a field environmental scientist, specializing in legacy contamination sites, where historical industrial or research activities have left persistent environmental impacts. Most of my work involves documenting conditions at old mining sites, chemical plants, military installations, things like that. The state uses the data to prioritize cleanup efforts and assess public health risks. He paused to study the map she'd spread out. Where did you get this? These old military surveys are usually classified or destroyed. Found it in my apartment, left behind by the previous tenant. It's what helped me identify the connection between the affected animals and this Fort Meridian location. Fort Meridian, Jake repeated, his expression growing more serious. That's actually why I wanted to meet with you. I've been trying to track down information about that facility for months. It's mentioned in several environmental impact assessments from the 1980s, but all the details are redacted or classified. What kind of animal symptoms are you documenting? Lena described Moose's wounds, the similar cases in Mrs. Chung's cat, and Dave Pritchard's sheep, and her morning soil sampling expedition. Jake listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions about timing, locations, and environmental conditions. This fits with some anomalies I've been documenting in water quality downstream from that area, he said when she finished. Unusual mineral concentrations, pH variations, trace elements that don't occur naturally in this region's geology. I've been trying to get approval for more extensive testing, but legacy military sites are bureaucratic nightmares. Too much red tape. Too many agencies with overlapping jurisdiction. So, what do we do? Lena asked. I can't just sit around waiting for bureaucrats to decide whether my dog's condition is worth investigating. Jake smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. I think we need to combine our resources, your veterinary expertise, and local knowledge, with my environmental testing capabilities and government access. Unofficially, of course, until we have enough data to make a compelling case for official investigation. They spent the next hour planning their approach. Jake would run preliminary analysis on her soil samples using equipment at the state laboratory, while she continued documenting animal cases and researching the historical background of Fort Meridian. They agreed to meet again in 3 days to compare findings and plan their next steps. As Lena drove home, she felt a mix of excitement and apprehension about what they might discover. For the first time since Moose's diagnosis, she wasn't facing the mystery alone. Margaret Holloway's private study above the used bookstore looked like something from an earlier century. Floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with local history volumes, boxes of old newspapers and documents, and a massive oak desk covered with the kind of careful research that only retired librarians possess the patience to conduct. Fort Meridian, Margaret said thoughtfully, adjusting her reading glasses as she pulled a thick folder from one of many filing cabinets. I've been the unofficial town historian for 40 years, and that place has always been a puzzle. Most people prefer to forget it existed. Lena sat across from her landlord in a comfortable wing chair that smelled of old books and lavender sachets. She'd come here hoping Margaret's legendary knowledge of Pine Ridge history might provide clues about what had happened at the abandoned facility, but she hadn't expected to find such an organized archive of information. What can you tell me about why it was closed? Lena asked, accepting a cup of tea and settling in for what she suspected would be a long conversation. The official story was military budget cuts in 1978, Margaret said, opening the folder to reveal newspaper clippings, photocopied government documents, and handwritten notes. But I was working at the county clerk's office back then, and I saw things that didn't match the official narrative. She pulled out a yellowed newspaper clipping from the Pine Ridge Weekly, dated October 1978. The headline read, 7 families quietly relocate following environmental incident. Below it was a brief article about residents of the Timber Ridge area accepting government bailouts of their property after what was described as a minor contamination event at the research facility. 7 families, Margaret continued, all living within a 5-mile radius of Fort Meridian. Their properties were purchased by the federal government at well above market value, and they were relocated to other parts of the state with full moving expenses paid. The government sealed all records related to the purchases under national security provisions. Lena studied the article, noting the careful language that revealed very little about what had actually happened. Do you know what kind of research was being conducted there? That's where things get interesting. Margaret pulled out a manila folder labeled Project Underground in faded typewriter text. I found this among some papers donated to the library by Dr. Elena Vasquez after she moved to Sunset Manor Nursing Home 3 years ago. Dr. Vasquez worked at Fort Meridian from 1974 to 1978 as a microbiologist specializing in soil-based organisms. The folder contained what appeared to be fragments of a classified document, partial pages with heavy redactions, but enough readable text to suggest the scope of the research project. Lena read through the visible portions, her scientific training helping her piece together the implications of what she was seeing. They were developing biological agents, she said slowly, something designed to break down organic materials in soil equipment, supplies, maybe even structures. A weapon that could destroy enemy resources without traditional combat. That's my interpretation as well, Margaret agreed. But something went wrong in 1978. The project was terminated abruptly. The facility was decommissioned, and everyone involved signed extensive non-disclosure agreements. Lena's phone buzzed with a text message from Jake. Lab results ready. Can you meet at 3 p.m.? Bring everything you found. She showed the message to Margaret, who nodded approvingly. Mr. Reeves seems like a serious young man. I ran into him at the county archives last week, researching mineral rights and land use records for the Timber Ridge area. It's good to know someone with official credentials is taking this seriously. An hour later, Lena met Jake at a small park on the edge of town, away from the potential eavesdropping of coffee shops or restaurants. He was waiting at a picnic table with a laptop and several manila folders spread out before him. Your soil samples confirm my worst suspicions, he said without preamble. The contamination is significant and unlike anything in my experience. Look at these mineral analysis results. He handed her a printout showing detailed chemical compositions. Of the 5 soil samples she'd collected, even with her limited chemistry background, she could see that several elements appeared in concentrations far above normal levels. These trace metals don't occur naturally in Pacific Northwest soil, Jake explained. Particularly this combination of rare earth elements and synthetic compounds. But what's really disturbing is this. He pointed to a section of the report highlighted in yellow. We found active bacterial colonies that appear to be genetically modified. Modified how? The DNA analysis shows splice patterns consistent with laboratory engineering, probably dating back decades, based on the genetic drift we're observing. These organisms were designed to break down specific types of organic compounds, but they've evolved since their original creation. Lena felt a chill run through her as she remembered the precise, circular wounds on Moose's shoulder. Are you saying these bacteria are what's affecting the animals? It's the most likely explanation. The wounds you've documented are consistent with highly targeted decomposition of living tissue. The bacteria appear to be programmed to create specific patterns of tissue breakdown, probably as a way to test their effectiveness during the original research. Jake pulled out another folder and showed her photocopied pages of land acquisition. Records. I've been tracking property purchases in the Timber Ridge area over the past 2 years. A company called Meridian Development Corporation has been systematically buying up land around the old Fort Meridian site, including several properties that were vacated after the 1978 incident. The resort development project, Lena said, remembering the community discussion she'd heard at the clinic and around town. They're planning to build a luxury destination resort right in the contaminated area. That's what they claim. But look at these construction permits. He showed her a series of official documents. The infrastructure they're planning, extensive excavation, Deep foundation work, specialized waste management systems. It's not consistent with resort construction. It looks more like environmental remediation or even continued research activities. The implications hit her like a physical blow. You think they know about the contamination, that the resort is a cover story for something else. I think they know exactly what's buried up there, and they're either trying to clean it up quietly or continue the research that was abandoned in 1978. Jake closed the folders and looked at her seriously. Either way, your dog and the other. Affected animals are evidence of something they'd prefer to keep hidden. Lena thought about Dr. Elena Vasquez, now living at Sunset Manor Nursing Home just 20 minutes from Pine Ridge. I need to talk to someone who was actually there when it happened. Margaret Holloway mentioned a former researcher who might still be alive. That could be dangerous, Jake warned. If there's an active cover-up in progress, the people involved won't hesitate to protect their interests. And if Dr. Vasquez signed the same kind of non-disclosure agreement as the other Fort Meridian personnel, she could face serious legal consequences for talking to us. But she might also be the only person who can help us understand how to treat the affected animals. Lena countered. Moose is stable for now, but what if the condition progresses? What if more animals are exposed? They agreed that Jake would continue his environmental analysis while Lena attempted to contact Dr. Vasquez. As they parted ways, Jake handed her a small device that looked like a modified cell phone. Encrypted communication, he explained. If this situation is as serious as we think, we need to assume our regular communications might be monitored. Use this if you discover anything important or if you feel like you're in danger. That evening, Lena called Sunset Manor and asked to speak with Dr. Elena Vasquez. The nurse who answered was helpful but protective of the elderly residents' privacy. Dr. Vasquez rarely takes calls from people she doesn't know, the nurse explained. But if you'd like to visit during regular hours, I can ask if she's willing to see you. May I tell her what this is regarding? Lena chose her words carefully. I'm a veterinary technician investigating some unusual animal health issues that might be related to her previous research work. I'm hoping she might be able to provide some scientific guidance. The next morning, she received a call back. Dr. Vasquez had agreed to see her, but only for a brief visit and only if Lena came along. The meeting was set for that afternoon at 2 p.m. Sunset Manor was a well-maintained facility on the outskirts of the next town over, surrounded by gardens that were obviously tended with care. Dr. Elena Vasquez turned out to be a small, dignified woman in her early 80s, with silver hair and sharp eyes that suggested her mind remained as keen as ever. You're the young woman asking questions about Fort Meridian, she said without preamble as Lena settled into the visitor's chair in her private room. I haven't spoken about that place in 45 years. Why should I start now? Lena pulled out her journal and showed Dr. Vasquez the photographs and sketches of the animal wounds. Because animals are suffering, and I think you might be the only person who knows how to help them. Dr. Vasquez studied the images for a long moment, her expression growing increasingly troubled. Finally, she looked up at Lena with eyes that held decades of regret. Those wounds, she said quietly, look exactly like what we observed in our test subjects during the final months of Project Underground. I haven't seen anything like them since 1978, and I prayed I never would again. She moved to her dresser and pulled out a small locked box, from which she retrieved a set of handwritten laboratory notes pages covered with detailed observations, chemical formulas, and sketch diagrams. If you're going to help those animals, Dr. Vasquez said, you need to understand exactly what we created up there and why it was supposed to stay buried forever. Dr. Elena Vasquez's hands trembled slightly as she opened her laboratory notebook, revealing pages of meticulous handwritten observations that represented 4 years of her life. she'd spent decades trying to forget. The project Underground Research. Notes, as the cover identified them, contained detailed documentation of experiments that had seemed promising at the time but had ultimately unleashed something far more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. "We called it Organism X47, Dr. Vasquez began, her voice carrying the weight of old guilt. A genetically modified soil bacterium designed to rapidly decompose organic military supplies, leather equipment, cotton uniforms, wooden structures, even certain types of metal alloys when combined with specific catalysts." Lena leaned forward, studying the detailed sketches and chemical formulas that filled the notebook pages. Even with her veterinary training, much of the advanced microbiology was beyond her expertise. But she could follow the general progression of the research from initial success to growing concern. "The early tests were remarkable," Dr. Vasquez continued, turning to a page filled with before and after photographs of various materials. "We could completely break down a canvas tent in less than 72 hours, leaving only harmless organic compounds that would naturally integrate with the soil ecosystem." "But something went wrong," Lena said, remembering the newspaper articles about the families who had been relocated in 1978. "Everything went wrong." Dr. Vasquez's voice grew heavy. "With regret. X47 was designed with built-in limitations. It was supposed to only affect dead organic matter, with a programmed lifespan of no more than 2 weeks in natural soil conditions. But by late 1977, we began noticing mutations in the bacterial colonies." She turned to a section of the notebook marked with red ink, showing detailed microscopic observations of bacterial samples. "The organism was adapting, evolving beyond our original parameters. It began showing activity against living plant matter, then small insects, and finally," she paused, looking directly at Lena. "Finally, it began creating those precise circular patterns in living mammalian tissue." Lena felt her stomach tighten as she thought about Moose's wounds. "The animals you tested on developed the same symptoms we're seeing now? Rabbits, mice, eventually larger subjects. The organism seemed particularly attracted to areas of high blood flow shoulder blades. Next, the base of the spine. It would create these perfect penetrating colonies, boring down into healthy tissue as if it were testing the effectiveness of its decomposition process." Dr. Vasquez turned to another page showing detailed anatomical drawings of affected animals. "We tried everything to reverse the mutations, chemical inhibitors, competing bacterial strains, even controlled burns of the contaminated soil. Nothing worked. By early 1978, X47 had spread beyond our containment areas and was affecting wildlife throughout a 5-mile radius of the facility. What finally stopped it? We never stopped it. We just buried it." Dr. Vasquez closed the notebook and looked out her window at the peaceful gardens beyond. The military decided the project was too dangerous to continue and too classified to publicly acknowledge. They evacuated the surrounding families, sealed the facility, and covered everything with 6 feet of concrete and industrial-grade soil barriers. "But the organism survived," Lena said, understanding now why the recent animal cases had emerged along the old hiking trails. Apparently so. 45 years in dormant state, probably waiting for the right environmental conditions to reactivate. Dr. Vasquez reached into the box again and pulled out a small glass vial containing what looked like ordinary soil. "I kept one sample against all regulations. Call it scientific curiosity or professional paranoia. I thought someday we might need to understand what we'd created." Lena stared at the vial, realizing she was looking at a laboratory specimen of one of the most dangerous biological agents ever developed by the U.S. military. "Is there an antidote? Some way to neutralize the organism or treat infected animals?" "We developed several experimental treatments in the final months before shutdown, but never had time to fully test their effectiveness." Dr. Vasquez pulled out another section of her notes, showing chemical formulas and treatment protocols. The most promising approach involved a combination of targeted antibiotics and competing bacterial strains that could outcompete X47 for resources. She handed Lena a photocopied page from her notes. This is the treatment protocol we were developing when the project was terminated. I can't guarantee it will work. We never had the opportunity to conduct proper trials, but it might give you somewhere to start. As Lena studied the treatment formula, Dr. Vasquez continued her story. The shutdown was handled by a private military contractor called Meridian Defense Systems. They were responsible for containment, cleanup, and maintaining security around the classified aspects of the project. The name sent a chill through Lena. Meridian like Meridian Development Corporation? It wouldn't surprise me if there was a connection. Military contractors often create civilian subsidiaries for work that requires less oversight. Dr. Vasquez's expression grew troubled. If Meridian Development is involved in current activities around Fort Meridian, they almost certainly know about the X47 contamination. Lena's encrypted phone buzzed with a message from Jake. Need to meet urgently. New developments. Usual place, 6 p.m. She showed the message to Dr. Vasquez, who nodded approvingly. You're going to need all the help you can get. The people who covered this up 45 years ago won't hesitate to protect their interests now. Will you help us? Your testimony could be crucial if we need to expose what's happening. Dr. Vasquez was quiet for a long moment, weighing decades of enforced silence against the current threat to public health. I signed agreements that could send me to federal prison if I violate them, even at my age. But I also took an oath as a scientist to do no harm. She looked at the photographs of the affected animals again. Yes, I'll help you. But we need to be extremely careful about how we proceed. As Lena prepared to leave, Dr. Vasquez handed her the original laboratory notebook. Take this. If something happens to me, it's the only complete record of what we created and how it might be stopped. Driving back toward Pine Ridge, Lena felt the weight of the notebook on the passenger seat beside her like a loaded weapon. She now understood the full scope of what they were facing, not just an environmental contamination, but an active cover-up of illegal biological weapons. Research that threatened every living creature in the area. Her phone rang as she reached the town limits. Dr. Harrison's voice came through the car speakers, tense with worry. Lena, I need you to come to the clinic immediately. We've had 4 more cases today, 2 dogs, a cat, and Mrs. Patterson's prize-winning goat, all showing the same symptoms as Moose, but progressing much faster. The organism was spreading, and time was running out to find a solution before the situation spiraled completely out of control. The stack of corporate land acquisition documents that Jake spread across the picnic table told a story of systematic deception that went far beyond a simple real estate development project. Each legal filing, property deed, and zoning application revealed another piece of Meridian Development Corporation's methodical plan to control every acre of land within a 5-mile radius of the buried Fort Meridian facility. They started buying properties 18 months ago, Jake explained, pointing to the earliest documents in the pile. Small parcels at first, vacant lots, abandoned homesteads, properties that had been on the market for years. Nothing that would attract attention individually. Lena studied the acquisition timeline while keeping one eye on her phone, waiting for updates from Dr. Harrison about the new cases at the clinic. The afternoon sun was fading behind the mountains, and she felt the pressure of time running out. As the X47 organism appeared to be spreading faster than anyone had anticipated. But look at this pattern, Jake continued, pulling out a hand-drawn map where he'd marked each property purchase in chronological order. They weren't buying randomly. Every single acquisition creates a buffer zone around the areas where we know X47 contamination is most concentrated. The map showed an almost perfect circle of corporate-owned land surrounding the old Fort Meridian site, with strategic purchases that blocked access to contaminated areas while maintaining the appearance of legitimate development planning. What looked like coincidental real estate investment was actually a carefully orchestrated containment strategy. "They know exactly where the contamination is," Lena said, tracing the property boundaries with her finger. "This isn't cleanup, it's concealment." Jake nodded grimly, "And it gets worse. I found connections between Meridian Development Corporation and the original contractor that handled the 1978 shutdown Meridian Defense Systems. Same parent company, different subsidiary names. They've been monitoring this site for 45 years. He pulled out another folder containing corporate registration documents and financial records. The parent company is Blackstone Military Solutions, a major defense contractor that specializes in biological and chemical weapons research for the Pentagon. They never stopped working on projects like X47. They just moved the research to more secure locations. Lena's encrypted phone buzzed with an urgent message from Dr. Harrison. "Situation critical. Need you here now. Bring everything you've learned." "I have to go," she said, gathering Dr. Vasquez's notebook and the corporate documents. "The animal cases are escalating, and Dr. Harrison needs help figuring out treatment options." "Wait," Jake said, grabbing her arm gently. "Before you go, there's something else you need to know. I tried to access more detailed environmental records about the site this afternoon, and my access was suddenly revoked. No explanation, just a message that my security clearance was under review." The implications sent a chill through her. "They know we're investigating, which means they know about your involvement too. Be careful, Lena. People who cover up illegal weapons programs don't hesitate to eliminate threats to their operations." 20 minutes later, Lena hurried through the back entrance of Pine Ridge Animal Clinic to find Dr. Harrison in examination room 2 with a golden retriever that looked disturbingly similar to Moose. The dog belonged to the Matthews family, who lived about 3 miles from the hiking trails where the contamination was concentrated. "The progression is much faster than what we saw with Moose, Doctor," Harrison said, showing her the wounds on the dog's shoulder and neck. "These lesions appeared overnight, and they're already twice as deep as Moose's were after several days." In the adjacent room, Sarah Chan was monitoring Mrs. Patterson's goat, which showed similar accelerated symptoms. The 2 cats in the back recovery area were in even worse condition, requiring 4 fluids to maintain hydration as the X47 organism continued its systematic tissue destruction. "Dr. Harrison, I think I know what we're dealing with, and I may have information about potential treatment." Lena pulled out Dr. Vasquez's notebook and opened it to the treatment protocol pages. "But we need to understand that this isn't a natural disease. It's an engineered biological weapon." She spent the next 30 minutes explaining everything. She'd learned about Project Underground, X47, and the corporate cover-up that was allowing the contamination to spread unchecked. Dr. Harrison listened with growing alarm, occasionally interrupting to ask technical questions about the bacterial organism's behavior and potential treatment approaches. "This treatment protocol," he said, studying Dr. Vasquez's notes, "requires specialized antibiotics and bacterial cultures that we don't have access to through normal veterinary supply channels. Some of these compounds might not even be commercially available. What about the state veterinary laboratory? Could they help us synthesize the treatments?" Dr. Harrison's expression grew troubled. "I tried calling Dr. Reeves at the state lab this morning for an update on our original tissue samples. Her office said she was unavailable and couldn't provide any information about ongoing cases. When I pressed for details, they transferred me to an administrator who claimed our samples had been misplaced and would need to be resubmitted." The pattern of obstruction was becoming clear. Someone with significant influence was working to suppress information about the contamination and prevent effective treatment of affected animals. Lena's regular phone rang with a call from an unknown local number. When she answered, the voice on the other end was carefully neutral and professional. "Ms. Morrison, this is Robert Chun with Meridian Development Corporation. I understand you've been asking questions about property development in the Timber Ridge area. I'd like to invite you to our offices tomorrow morning to discuss the project and address any concerns you might have." "I'm not sure what you mean," Lena said carefully, gesturing for Dr. Harrison to listen in on the conversation. "We're aware of your interest in local environmental conditions and their potential impact on animal health. As a responsible development company, we want to make sure community members have accurate information about our project and its safety measures." The implied threat was clear despite the polite language. They knew about her investigation, and they wanted to control the narrative before it went any further. "I appreciate your offer," Lena replied, "but I'm quite busy with my work at the veterinary clinic. Perhaps you could email me the information instead." "I'm afraid we need to discuss this in person. Our offices are at 247 Industrial Way, tomorrow at 10 a.m. I trust we'll see you there." The line went dead, leaving Lena staring at her phone with a growing sense of dread. Dr. Harrison looked equally concerned. "They're not asking," he said quietly. "They're demanding." As if to emphasize the urgency of their situation, the golden retriever on the examination table began showing signs of respiratory distress. The X47 organism was progressing from localized tissue damage to systemic infection, and they were running out of time to find an effective treatment. Outside, the first drops of evening rain began tapping against the clinic windows, and Lena realized that tomorrow's meeting with Meridian Development Corporation might determine not just the fate of the affected animals, but her own safety as well. The revelation came at 6:30 a.m. when Lena arrived at the clinic early to check on the overnight patients and found Dr. Harrison already there, surrounded by manila folders and looking like he hadn't slept at all. On his desk lay a thick stack of Dr. Harrison's hidden medical records files she'd never seen before, labeled with federal agency letterheads and marked with security classifications. "Lena, sit down," Dr. Harrison said, his voice heavy with exhaustion and something that looked like relief. "There are things I need to tell you before your meeting with Meridian Development this morning." She settled into the chair across from his desk, studying the documents spread before him. Among the papers she could see correspondence with the Centers for Disease Control, the Environmental Protection Agency, and what appeared to be military medical research facilities. "I haven't been as uninformed about this situation as I led you to believe," he began, meeting her eyes directly. "When Moose first presented with those unusual wounds, I immediately recognized them from medical literature I'd seen during my military service 25 years ago." Lena felt the ground shifting beneath her understanding of the past week. "Military service?" "Army Veterinary Corps, specializing in biological warfare defense. I spent 3 years at Fort Detrick working on countermeasures for exotic biological agents that might be used against military animals, horses, working dogs, livestock in occupied territories." He pulled out a folder marked "Confidential" and opened it to reveal detailed photographs and medical reports. "I knew those wounds weren't natural, and I suspected they were related to classified research programs from the Cold War era. So, I reached out to contacts at federal health agencies while you were conducting your independent investigation." The documents showed that Dr. Harrison had been communicating with federal authorities since the day after Moose's initial examination. There were detailed reports of every case they'd seen, tissue sample analyses far more sophisticated than anything the state veterinary lab could provide, and treatment protocols developed by military biodefense specialists. "Why didn't you tell me?" Lena asked, feeling a mix of betrayal and confusion. "Because federal agencies work slowly and carefully, especially when dealing with classified programs. If I told you that Moose was infected with an illegal biological weapon, would you have patiently waited months for an official investigation to unfold? Or would you have done exactly what you did, start asking dangerous questions and putting yourself at risk? She had to admit he was right. Knowing the truth would have driven her to take the same actions, probably more recklessly. Dr. Harrison pulled out another section of files. The federal investigation has been running parallel to yours, and it's revealed something much more serious than a simple cover-up of a Cold War accident. Agent Sarah Martinez from the FBI's Biological Counterterrorism Unit has been coordinating with me for the past 4 days. As if summoned by his words, the clinic's back door opened and a woman in her 40s entered, wearing the kind of practical clothing that suggested law enforcement training. She had short, dark hair, intelligent eyes, and the confident bearing of someone accustomed to handling dangerous situations. "Agent Martinez," Dr. Harrison said, "this is Lena Morrison, the veterinary technician I've been telling you about." Agent Martinez shook Lena's hand and settled into a chair she'd obviously occupied before. "Ms. Morrison, your investigation has been remarkably thorough, and we appreciate your dedication to protecting the animals in your community. But we need you to understand the full scope of what we're dealing with." She opened a laptop and pulled up what appeared to be surveillance footage. Meridian Development Corporation isn't trying to cover up an old accident. They're using it as cover for active biological weapons research. The resort development is a front for a new testing facility where they're planning to weaponize evolved strains of the X-47 organism. The footage showed the Timber Ridge area from aerial perspective, with timestamps from the past 3 months. Instead of resort construction, the images revealed sophisticated laboratory buildings being constructed underground with ventilation systems and containment facilities that look nothing like hospitality infrastructure. "The current X-47 outbreak isn't an accident," Agent Martinez continued. "It's a field test. They deliberately disturbed the containment barriers from the 1978 burial site to study how the evolved organism behaves in a natural environment with living subjects." Lena felt sick as the implications became clear. The animal's Moose, the others, they're test subjects. And the human population of Pine Ridge is the control group for studying long-term exposure effects. They've been monitoring the community's health data for months, looking for signs of cross-species transmission or other biological effects. Dr. Harrison leaned forward. "This is where we need your help, Lena. The meeting with Meridian Development this morning isn't just a threat, it's an opportunity. Agent Martinez's team needs evidence of their illegal activities, and you're in a position to gather it." "You want me to wear a wire?" Lena said, understanding immediately. Agent Martinez nodded. "We have recording equipment that's virtually undetectable, and legal authorization for surveillance based on national security concerns. If we can get recordings of corporate executives discussing the biological weapons program, we'll have grounds for immediate arrests and facility shutdown." "What about the affected animals? Do you have access to the treatments Dr. Vasquez mentioned?" "We've been working with military biodefense laboratories to synthesize the experimental treatments from her research notes," Dr. Harrison said. "The first batch of modified antibiotics and competing bacterial strains arrived this morning via military courier." He gestured toward a secured medical refrigerator in the corner of his office. "We've already begun treatment protocols for the most critical cases, including Moose. Early results are promising. The progression of tissue damage has stopped, and we're seeing signs of healing in the smaller wounds." The relief Lena felt about Moose's treatment was tempered by anger about the deception that had made it necessary. How long has the federal government known about this? The FBI began investigating Blackstone Military Solutions 6 months ago, based on intelligence reports about illegal bioweapons research, Agent Martinez explained. "But we needed evidence of active testing on U.S. soil before we could get authorization for arrests and facility seizure. Your documentation of the animal cases provided the proof we needed." She pulled out a small device that looked like an ordinary button. "This is a digital recording system with a range of about 50 feet. It'll capture everything said in the meeting, and it's designed to be undetectable by standard security sweeps. What if they search me? What if they realize I'm working with federal agents? We'll have a full tactical team positioned within 2 minutes of the Meridian development offices," Agent Martinez assured her. "Any sign of trouble, and we move in immediately." Dr. Harrison reached across the desk and squeezed her hand. "I know this feels like betrayal, Lena. I should have trusted you with the truth from the beginning. But I was trying to protect you while we built a case strong enough to shut down their operations permanently." Looking at both of them, Dr. Harrison, with his decades of experience and hidden military background, Agent Martinez with her federal authority and tactical support, Lena realized that her amateur investigation had been part of a much larger operation from the beginning. She'd been protected and guided while believing she was working alone. What happens after the meeting? If we get the recordings you need: mass arrests, facility seizure, full environmental cleanup, and medical treatment for anyone who's been exposed, Agent Martinez said, plus congressional hearings about how a defense contractor was allowed to conduct illegal biological weapons testing on American soil. Lena thought about all the animals suffering from X47 infections, about Dr. Vasquez carrying decades of guilt, about the Pine Ridge families who had no idea they were living in the middle of an active biological weapons test site. "When do we start?" she asked, reaching for the recording device. The next 2 hours were spent in detailed preparation reviewing the corporate documents Jake had found, rehearsing questions that would elicit incriminating responses, and coordinating with the federal tactical team that would provide backup. By 9:45 a.m., Lena was walking toward the Meridian Development Corporation offices with a hidden recorder and the weight of justice on her shoulders. The federal wire recording equipment felt heavier than its actual weight as Lena clipped the tiny device inside her jacket pocket. Agent Martinez had spent 30 minutes showing her how to activate the recording system with a simple gesture. That would look like adjusting her clothing, and how to send a distress signal if the situation turned dangerous. "Remember," Agent Martinez said as they ran through the final preparations in the back of an unmarked surveillance van parked 2 blocks from Meridian Development Corporation's offices. "Your goal is to get them talking about the biological weapons program. Ask about environmental safety measures for the resort development. Express concerns about local animal health. Anything that might prompt them to reveal their knowledge of X47. Dr. Harrison sat across from her in the cramped van, monitoring radio communications with the tactical team positioned around the corporate building. His transformation from rural veterinarian to federal operative coordinator still felt surreal, but she was beginning to understand how his military background had shaped his careful, methodical approach to the crisis. "Jake is already in position at the coffee shop across the street," Dr. Harrison reported, checking his watch. "He's been working undercover with the EPA's Criminal Investigation Division for the past 8 months, specifically targeting Blackstone Military Solutions for environmental crimes." The revelation that Jake had also been more than he seemed should have been shocking, but Lena was getting used to discovering that her amateur investigation had been surrounded by professionals from the beginning. "Is there anyone in this operation who's actually who they claim to be?" Agent Martinez smiled grimly. "Dr. Vasquez is exactly who she appears to be, a retired scientist with a guilty conscience, who's been waiting 45 years for a chance to make things right. Her cooperation has been crucial to understanding the technical aspects of what we're dealing with." The radio crackled with updates from the tactical team leaders positioned at strategic points around the Meridian Development Building. "Tango 1. We have visual confirmation of target vehicle arriving. 3 subjects entering building through main entrance. Those are the corporate executives we've been tracking, Agent Martinez explained. Robert Chun, the man who called you yesterday, is actually Dr. Robert Chun, former military bioweapons researcher and current director of Blackstone's Special Projects Division. If anyone's going to incriminate themselves, it'll be him. Lena checked the small mirror Agent Martinez had given her, making sure the recording device wasn't visible through her clothing. She'd chosen a conservative business outfit that would help her blend in with the corporate environment, while concealing the electronic equipment that could expose the entire illegal operation. What's our backup plan if they realize I'm recording them? Dr. Harrison leaned forward, his expression serious. If you feel like you're in immediate danger, use the distress signal Agent Martinez showed you. We'll have armed federal agents in the building within 60 seconds. But Lena, he paused, meeting her eyes directly. These people have killed to protect their operation. We found evidence that the families relocated in 1978 didn't all volunteer to leave. Some of them simply disappeared from public records after signing property transfer documents. The weight of what they were attempting settled more heavily on her shoulders. She wasn't just gathering evidence about illegal animal testing. She was potentially exposing herself to people who had committed murder to protect their biological weapons program. Tango 2. Subject is approaching the building entrance. All units maintain position until we have confirmation of recording activation. Agent Martinez handed Lena a small earpiece that looked like a hearing aid. This will let us monitor the conversation and provide guidance if needed. If the situation becomes dangerous, we'll be able to hear everything and respond immediately. As Lena stepped out of the surveillance van, she felt the familiar weight of her veterinary journal in her purse, a comforting reminder of why she was taking these risks. Every page of observations about suffering animals, every sketch of unexplained wounds, every note about environmental contamination represented lives that deserve protection and justice. The Meridian Development Corporation occupied a sleek, modern building that seemed out of place in Pine Ridge's rustic downtown area. The lobby featured polished marble floors, expensive artwork, and the kind of corporate luxury that suggested significant financial resources behind their operations. Robert Chun met her at the reception desk, a man in his 50s with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to controlling conversations. He wore an expensive suit and maintained the professionally friendly demeanor of a successful businessman. But Lena noticed that his eyes never stopped evaluating her responses to his words. Ms. Morrison, thank you for coming. I understand you have concerns about our development project and its potential environmental impact. I'm interested in making sure the resort construction doesn't harm local wildlife, Lena said, activating the recording device with a gesture that looked like smoothing her jacket. As a veterinary professional, I've been seeing some unusual animal health issues that might be related to environmental factors. Chen led her toward an elevator, his expression showing polite interest while his body language suggested he was guiding her toward a predetermined destination. That's exactly the kind of community input we value. Our environmental impact studies have been very thorough, but it's always helpful to get local expert perspectives. The elevator rose to the third floor, opening onto a corridor lined with offices that looked more like a military facility than a development company. Through open doorways, Lena caught glimpses of computer workstations, displaying what appeared to be biological research data and satellite imagery of the Timber Ridge area. This is our project coordination center, China explained, leading her into a conference room where two other people were waiting. I'd like you to meet Dr. Elizabeth Walsh, our environmental safety coordinator, and Colonel James Mitchell, retired, who handles our regulatory compliance. The introductions felt carefully staged, as if each person had been selected to play a specific role in convincing her that Meridian Development was a legitimate operation. But the military bearing of Colonel Mitchell and the fact that Dr. Walsh's business cards identified her as a microbiologist rather than an environmental consultant suggested this was anything but a routine development company. "Please, have a seat," Chun said, gesturing toward a chair that positioned her with her back to the door, a detail that didn't escape her notice. "We understand you've been asking questions about historical land use in the Timber Ridge area. I'm concerned about soil contamination that might be affecting local animals," Lena replied, keeping her voice steady despite her growing unease. "Several veterinary cases have presented with unusual symptoms that suggest environmental exposure to something toxic." Dr. Walsh leaned forward with apparent interest. "What kind of symptoms are you observing?" Lena described the circular wounds and tissue damage patterns, watching carefully for reactions from the three corporate representatives. She noticed Colonel Mitchell's eyes narrowed slightly when she mentioned the precision of the lesions, and Dr. Walsh exchanged a quick glance with Chun that suggested they were familiar with what she was describing. "Those symptoms sound concerning," Chun said smoothly. "Of course, the Timber Ridge area has a complex history of industrial activity dating back several decades. Old logging operations, mining exploration, even some government research facilities that operated during the Cold War era." The admission that they knew about Fort Meridian sent Lena's pulse racing, but she kept her expression neutral. "Government research facilities? Nothing significant," Colonel Mitchell interjected quickly. "Some routine geological surveys and environmental monitoring programs, all properly decommissioned according to federal regulations. The important thing," Dr. Walsh added, "is that our current development project includes comprehensive soil remediation and environmental cleanup. Any historical contamination issues will be fully addressed before construction begins." Chun pulled out a folder containing what appeared to be environmental impact reports and construction plans. "We're not just building a resort, we're creating a state-of-the-art environmental research facility that will study and remediate contamination from previous industrial activities in the region." "Environmental research facility?" Lena asked, sensing an opportunity to get them talking about their real operations. "Advanced biotechnology applications," Dr. Walsh explained, her professional enthusiasm seeming genuine. "We're developing innovative bacterial treatments for soil contamination organisms that can break down toxic compounds and restore natural ecosystem balance." "Bacterial treatments," Lena repeated, remembering Dr. Vasquez's descriptions of X47. "What kind of bacteria are you working with?" "Proprietary organisms developed through years of research," Chun said, his tone becoming slightly less friendly. "But I think you'd find our approach fascinating, given your veterinary background. We're particularly interested in applications that could benefit animal health in contaminated environments." Colonel Mitchell stood up and moved to the window, his casual movement positioning him between Lena and the door. "Ms. Morrison, we should probably discuss your recent activities more directly. We know you've been collecting soil samples from restricted areas and asking questions about classified historical programs." The shift in tone was subtle but unmistakable. This was no longer a friendly informational meeting. It was an interrogation. "I don't know what you mean by restricted areas," Lena said, grateful for the earpiece that let her know Agent Martinez and the tactical team were monitoring every word. "I've been hiking on public trails and investigating veterinary cases in my professional capacity. Your professional capacity doesn't include conducting unauthorized environmental sampling or accessing classified military documents." Dr. Walsh sighed, her friendly demeanor dropping away to reveal something much colder. "We know about your meetings with Dr. Elena Vasquez and your acquisition of Project Underground research materials." They knew about Dr. Vasquez. Lena felt a chill of fear not just for herself, but for the elderly scientist who had risked her freedom to help expose the truth. "Dr. Vasquez is in her 80s and living in a nursing home," Lena said, trying to keep her voice steady. I hardly think she poses a threat to your resort development project. Chun laughed, a sound without humor. Resort development. You're still pretending you don't understand what's really happening here. He moved to a wall-mounted display screen and activated a presentation showing detailed maps of the Timber Ridge area. Instead of resort facilities, the images showed underground laboratory complexes, containment facilities, and what appeared to be biological testing ranges extending deep into the forest. Project Underground never ended, Ms. Morrison. It evolved. The X47 organism that's currently affecting local wildlife represents 45 years of controlled evolution and genetic refinement. We've been monitoring its development, guiding its mutations, and preparing for the next phase of field testing. Field testing on what? Lena asked, though she was beginning to suspect she knew the answer. Initially, local wildlife populations served as excellent biological indicators, Dr. Walsh said, pulling up charts showing animal population data over several decades. But we're approaching the point where we need to understand human exposure effects. That's where the resort development provides perfect cover-controlled exposure of a small population under carefully monitored conditions. Colonel Mitchell returned to his seat, his movement casual, but his eyes never leaving Lena's face. The Pine Ridge community represents an ideal test group isolated enough to contain variables, small enough to monitor comprehensively, and disposable enough that any negative outcomes won't attract significant attention. The casual discussion of using an entire town as test subjects for biological weapons research was so coldly clinical that Lena felt physically sick. But she forced herself to keep asking questions, knowing that every word was being recorded and would provide evidence for the federal prosecution. What about the families who were relocated in 1978? Were they part of your testing program too? Some cooperated with voluntary relocation programs, Chun said. Others required more direct intervention to protect operational security. The euphemistic language didn't hide the implication that people had been killed to protect the project's secrecy. Lena thought about Jake's research into the families, who had simply disappeared from public records after signing property transfers. I think I've heard enough, she said, starting to stand from her chair. Actually, Ms. Morrison, Colonel Mitchell said, not moving, but somehow conveying that she shouldn't try to leave. We haven't finished our discussion. We need to talk about your future cooperation with our research program and the consequences for yourself and Dr. Harrison if you choose not to cooperate. The threat to Dr. Harrison made her blood run cold, but she knew that Agent Martinez and the tactical team were listening to every word. Help was coming. She just needed to stay alive long enough for them to arrive. The live recording of corporate confession continued as Robert Chun moved closer to Lena's chair, his professional mask completely abandoned now that they believed they had her trapped in their conference room. Through her earpiece, she could hear Agent Martinez coordinating with the tactical team, but the federal agents needed more evidence of the full scope of the conspiracy before they could move in. Your cooperation would be voluntary, of course, Chun said, his tone making it clear that cooperation was anything but optional. We need a local veterinary professional to monitor the health effects of controlled X47 exposure in the Pine Ridge population. Think of it as a long-term epidemiological study. You're talking about deliberately infecting people with a biological weapon, Lena said, keeping her voice steady despite the horror of what she was hearing. Dr. Walsh pulled up another set of charts on the display screen, showing population health data and demographic breakdowns of Pine Ridge residents. The exposure would be gradual and carefully calibrated. We've spent decades refining X47 to study its effects on human subjects without causing immediately fatal reactions. Not immediately fatal, Lena repeated, ensuring the recording captured the casual admission of intent to kill. The goal is to understand long-term immune system responses, cellular degradation patterns, and transmission vectors, Colonel Mitchell explained with the detached professionalism of someone discussing a routine military operation. Information that's crucial for developing both offensive biological weapons and defensive countermeasures. Chun activated another section of the presentation, showing detailed floor plans of the underground facility they were constructing beneath the supposed resort development. The surface-level resort provides perfect cover for monitoring the test. Population: hotel guests, restaurant patrons, spa visitors, all potential subjects for controlled exposure studies. And the local population provides a baseline for comparison, Dr. Walsh added. We can study the progression of symptoms in individuals with different ages, health conditions, and genetic backgrounds. It's the kind of comprehensive human testing that's impossible to conduct in traditional laboratory settings. Through her earpiece, Lena heard Agent Martinez's voice. We have enough evidence for arrests. Tactical team is moving into position. Keep them talking for 30 more seconds. Colonel Mitchell stood up again and moved to the door, his actions seemingly casual, but effectively blocking her exit route. Of course, your participation in the monitoring program would require absolute discretion. The same kind of long-term, non-disclosure agreements that Dr. Vasquez signed in 1978. What happens if someone refuses to sign your agreements? Lena asked, thinking about the families who had disappeared rather than relocating voluntarily. People who pose security risks to classified defense programs tend to have accidents, Chine said matter-of-factly. Car crashes on mountain roads, hiking accidents in remote areas, sudden medical emergencies that can't be adequately explained. Unfortunately, Pine Ridge is the kind of rural community where such tragedies are easily overlooked by outside authorities. The casual discussion of murder as a routine administrative procedure was so chilling that Lena felt her hands trembling. But she forced herself to ask one more crucial question. How many other communities have you used as test sites for X-47? Dr. Walsh consulted her tablet and pulled up what appeared to be a map of the western United States marked with multiple location indicators. Pine Ridge is our 6th field test site over the past 15 years. The previous studies provided valuable data about containment protocols, exposure vectors, and population management techniques. Population management, Lena said, making sure the recording captured the euphemism. Controlling information flow, eliminating witnesses, managing local government cooperation, Colonel Mitchell explained. Standard counterintelligence procedures for classified research operations. The sound of footsteps in the corridor outside caught everyone's attention. Chun moved to the conference room's internal phone and pressed a button that should have connected him to building security. Strange, he said when no one answered. Our security team should be monitoring all visitor access. Through her earpiece, Agent Martinez's voice was calm and professional. Federal agents, building secured. Moving to your location now. The door to the conference room burst open, and 3 agents in tactical gear entered with weapons drawn. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Everyone on the ground, hands visible. Chun, Dr. Walsh, and Colonel Mitchell reacted with the disciplined compliance of people familiar with law enforcement procedures. But their expressions showed more annoyance than surprise, as if getting arrested for conspiracy to commit biological terrorism was simply an occupational hazard they'd prepared for. Miss Morrison, are you injured? Agent Martinez asked as she entered behind the tactical team. I'm fine, Lena replied, standing carefully and keeping her hands visible until the agents confirmed. She was the federal informant they were expecting as the corporate executives were handcuffed and read their rights. Chun looked directly at Lena with cold calculation rather than anger. You have no idea what you've just disrupted. This program has protection at the highest levels of government. Will be released within hours, and your interference will be dealt with accordingly. The recording equipment captured everything. Agent Martinez told Lena as additional federal agents secured the building, including admissions of multiple homicides, biological weapons development, and planned genocide of civilian populations. This evidence will hold up in federal court. But even as the arrests were being completed, Lena couldn't shake the feeling that Chun's confident prediction about high-level protection might prove more accurate than Agent Martinez's assurances about justice. The federal arrest warrants that Agent Martinez pulled from her tactical vest represented months of careful legal preparation, each document precisely worded to withstand the kind of high-powered defense attorneys that Blackstone Military Solutions would inevitably deploy. As she read the charges against Robert Chun, Dr. Elizabeth Walsh, and Colonel James Mitchell, the scope of their crimes became even more staggering. Conspiracy to develop biological weapons in violation of international treaty obligations. Agent Martinez read aloud as Chun was processed for transport. Multiple counts of first-degree murder in connection with witness elimination programs. Conspiracy to commit genocide through biological agent deployment against civilian populations. Additional federal agents were streaming into the Meridian Development Building, securing computers, files, and laboratory equipment that would provide evidence of the full scope of Blackstone's illegal operations. Through the conference room windows, Lena could see specialized hazmat teams preparing to enter the underground facility, where X-47 research had been conducted. The immediate priority is environmental containment, Agent Martinez explained as she escorted Lena toward the building's exit. We have military biodefense specialists en route to secure any active X-47 cultures and begin decontamination procedures for the affected areas. Dr. Harrison was waiting in the surveillance van when they emerged from the building, monitoring communications with the tactical teams that were simultaneously raiding Blackstone facilities in 3 other states. How many other sites were they operating? He asked Agent Martinez. Based on the documents we seized, at least 8 active biological weapons research facilities, with 6 communities currently being used as human test sites. She handed him a tablet showing a map with multiple location markers across the western United States. We're conducting coordinated raids at all locations, but the legal processes for shutting down such a large operation will take months. Lena felt overwhelmed by the scale of what they'd uncovered. What about the people in those other communities? Are they being warned about potential X-47 exposure? Emergency response teams are being deployed to all affected areas, Agent Martinez assured her. Medical personnel, environmental cleanup specialists, and community liaison officers who specialize in handling classified contamination incidents. Her phone rang with an urgent call from the Pine Ridge Animal Clinic. Sarah Chun's voice was tense with worry. Lena, you need to get back here immediately. We've had 6 more animals brought in with X-47 symptoms, and Dr. Harrison's experimental treatments aren't working for the new cases. I'll be there in 10 minutes, Lena replied, then turned to Agent Martinez. The organism is still spreading. The arrests won't stop animals from dying if we can't get the treatment protocols working. Dr. Harrison was already starting the van's engine. The military biodefense team brought additional treatment compounds this morning. We might need to adjust dosages or try combination therapies. 20 minutes later, they were back at the clinic, examining a border collie that belonged to the Jenkins family, whose farm was located even closer to the old Fort Meridian site than the other affected properties. The dog's X-47 lesions were more extensive than any they'd seen previously, and the animal was showing signs of systemic infection that hadn't appeared in earlier cases. The organism is evolving even faster than Dr. Vasquez predicted, Dr. Harrison said as he adjusted the 4-line delivering experimental antibiotics. These lesions are deeper, more aggressive, and resistant to treatments that worked on the earlier cases. Jake arrived at the clinic carrying additional soil samples and water quality test results from the most recent contamination areas. His EPA credentials had given him access to advanced laboratory equipment that revealed disturbing trends in the organism's development. X47 isn't just spreading geographically, he reported, showing them detailed bacterial culture analyses. It's adapting to each new environment it encounters, developing resistance to natural soil conditions that should have limited its growth. Lena studied the laboratory data while monitoring the border collie's vital signs. It's learning. Each new exposure teaches it how to survive in different environments and overcome different biological defenses. Dr. Harrison pulled up the military treatment protocols on his computer, comparing the standard formulations with the modified compounds that had been developed specifically for the evolved X47 strains. We need to contact Dr. Vasquez again. Our original research notes might contain information about the organism's adaptive mechanisms that could help us develop more effective treatments. Agent Martinez's radio crackled with updates from the federal operation. All primary targets in custody, facilities secured, environmental containment teams deployed. But we're getting reports of X47 outbreaks at locations that weren't our target list. How is that possible? Lena asked. Either our intelligence about the scope of their operations was incomplete, Agent Martinez replied grimly, or the organism has already spread beyond the areas they were actively monitoring. The implications sent a chill through everyone in the clinic. They had successfully arrested the people responsible for weaponizing X47, but the biological agent itself might now be beyond anyone's ability to contain or control. As if to emphasize the urgency of their situation, the border collie's condition suddenly deteriorated, requiring emergency resuscitation procedures. The race to develop effective treatments had become a race against time, not just for individual animals, but potentially for entire ecosystems that could be devastated by an organism designed to consume organic matter without natural limitations. We need Dr. Vasquez, Dr. Harrison said, as they worked to stabilize their patient. She's the only person alive who understands how X47 was originally designed to be controlled. 6 months later, the simple wooden sign hanging outside the converted Victorian house on Maple Street read, Morrison Animal Care. Truth in Healing in elegant script lettering. Lena's new veterinary practice sign represented more than just a business name. It embodied her transformation from a naive veterinary student into a professional advocate for both animal health and environmental justice. Dr. Harrison emerged from examination room 2, where he'd been monitoring the recovery progress of a young golden retriever that had been among the last X47 cases treated during the crisis. The dog showed no remaining signs of the mysterious circular wounds that had once threatened to kill him, thanks to the refined treatment protocols they developed with Dr. Vasquez's guidance and military biodefense research. How's Apollo doing? Lena asked, looking up from her patient charts, a digital system now. But she still kept her original leather journal as a reminder of how the investigation had begun. Complete recovery. His tissue regeneration is actually better than we expected. The competing bacterial cultures seem to have enhanced his natural healing processes. Dr. Harrison smiled with the satisfaction of someone who had seen his worst fears transformed into hope. Mrs. Patterson is picking him up this afternoon, and I suspect he'll be spoiled even more than usual. The partnership between Lena and Dr. Harrison had evolved naturally after the federal investigation concluded. His reputation had been enhanced rather than damaged by his role as a federal informant, and her courage during the crisis had earned respect throughout the veterinary community. Together, they had created a practice that specialized in environmental health issues while maintaining the traditional small-town veterinary services that Pine Ridge needed. Jake Reeves appeared in the doorway, carrying a folder of environmental monitoring reports that had become a monthly ritual. His official role as EPA regional investigator had expanded to include oversight of the massive cleanup operation at Fort Meridian. But he'd also become a close friend and frequent dinner companion. "Latest contamination readings from the Timber Ridge area," he announced, settling into the chair beside Lena's desk. "I'm happy to report that X47 levels are now undetectable in all previously affected soil and water samples." The cleanup had been the largest environmental remediation project in Pacific Northwest history, involving hundreds of specialists and millions of dollars in federal funding. The underground Blackstone facility had been completely demolished. The contaminated soil had been removed and treated at specialized military disposal sites, and the entire area had been replanted with vegetation selected specifically for its ability to prevent future contamination. "Any word from Dr. Vasquez?" Lena asked, though she already knew the answer from Jake's expression. "She's doing well at the assisted living facility in Portland. The federal prosecutors decided not to pursue charges against her, given her cooperation, and the fact that her research notes were crucial to developing the X47 countermeasures." Jake paused, then smiled. "She asked me to tell you that she's been working on a memoir about her experiences with Project Underground. She wants to make sure the historical record includes the whole truth about what happened." The legal proceedings against Blackstone Military Solutions and its corporate executives had resulted in unprecedented convictions for biological weapons crimes. Robert Chun, Dr. Elizabeth Walsh, and Colonel Mitchell were all serving life sentences in federal prison, and the company itself had been dissolved with its assets used to fund victim compensation and environmental cleanup efforts. What about the other communities that were affected? Dr. Harrison asked, referring to the 5 other towns where Blackstone had been conducting human exposure experiments. "All residents have received comprehensive medical screening and treatment," Jake replied. "The communities have been declared safe for continued habitation, and each town receives significant federal development funds to support economic recovery from the disruption." Lena walked to the window and looked out at the mountain ridges where she and Moose had been hiking when this all began. The old logging trails had been permanently closed and the area redesigned as a protected wildlife sanctuary, with new hiking paths that avoided the remediated zones, while still allowing people to enjoy the natural beauty of the region. Moose himself was lounging in the sunny spot by the reception desk that had become his unofficial throne, serving as an unofficial therapy dog for nervous pets and their owners. His complete recovery had made him something of a local celebrity, and children often asked to pet the dog who helped save the town. "The memorial dedication is next week," Dr. Harrison mentioned, referring to the granite monument being installed at the entrance to the new Timber Ridge Wildlife Sanctuary. It honors the animals that died from X47 exposure and that the families who were displaced or killed during the original cover-up in 1978. The memorial had been Lena's idea, supported by the entire Pine Ridge community and funded by the federal settlement with Blackstone. It would ensure that future generations understood both the dangers of illegal biological weapons research and the importance of speaking truth even when it was dangerous. As the afternoon wore on, Lena found herself reflecting on how much had changed since the Tuesday morning when Dr. Harrison had first lifted the fur on Moose's shoulder. The frightened veterinary student who had stumbled into a biological weapons conspiracy had become a confident professional who now lectured at veterinary schools about environmental health threats and served on federal advisory committees for biodefense policy. The crisis had also strengthened the Pine Ridge community in unexpected ways. The shared experience of unknowingly living in a biological weapons test site had created bonds among neighbors who might otherwise have remained strangers. Town meetings were better attended, environmental issues received more attention, and there was a new appreciation for the courage required to question authority when public health was at stake. That evening, As Lena locked the clinic and prepared to walk home with Moose, she paused at the memorial sign that had been placed near the entrance to honor the animals and families affected by Project Underground. The inscription read simply, "In memory of those who suffered in silence, and in honor of those who found the courage to speak truth." It was exactly the legacy she hoped their work would leave, not just the scientific achievement of defeating a biological weapon, but the human achievement of choosing justice over safety, truth over convenience, and community welfare over personal comfort. Walking through the peaceful streets of Pine Ridge with Moose trotting contentedly beside her, Lena realized that the most important lesson from their experience wasn't about biological weapons or corporate conspiracies. It was about the ordinary people who, when faced with extraordinary circumstances, chose to do the right thing regardless of the personal cost. The future felt bright with possibility.